Right, well, polls have opened on the east coast of the U.S. as voters across the country decide which party will control the United States Congress in January. More than 40 million Americans cast their ballots in early voting across the 50 states, with control of the House of Representatives and the Senate up for grabs. The midterm elections are seen as a referendum on the party in power. Let's get the latest now. We now cross to SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who is at a polling station in Midtown Manhattan. A very good day to you, Sherwin. I must say, it does seem, Sherwin, that Americans are always voting for something. It's what I picked up as I saw that Americans are back at the polls. Well, one could say democracy in action. But let's talk about why these elections matter. Why are they important? And so soon after those presidential elections that, of course, we saw in 2020.
I'm glad you started that way, Flo. We do feel we're in a perpetual election cycle in the United States. Just 2 years ago, we, of course, had those dramatic presidential elections in 2020 that ousted incumbent President Donald Trump, Joe Biden, then sweeping. But, of course, a lot of controversy, false claims of fraud. And now we're back at it less than 2 years later. So we are perpetually in an election cycle. We feel that we're in perpetual campaigning mode. But these elections matter because, as you correctly point out, it's a referendum on the incumbent President Joe Biden. Democrats have control of the Senate. Democrats control the House of Representatives. And this could change after this election. And that has implications for the last 2 years of President Biden's first 4-year term. Essentially, if Democrats lose control of the House of Representatives, they will lose the Speaker. Nancy Pelosi will lose her speakership. That will go to a Republican. And then, of course, control of the Senate is very, very important for someone like President Biden because they have to confirm his cabinet appointments. They confirm federal judicial appointments, including vacancies that might open up on the Supreme Court. And if the abortion ruling earlier this year is any indication of why the Supreme Court matters so much, then it points to, people casting their votes in this election. So a very, very important election year. There are about 35 Senate seats up for grabs, all 435 House of Representative seats. And then, of course, some 36 governorships. Here in the United States, people directly vote for their premiers, their provincial premiers, essentially what a state governor, the equivalent of a state governor in the United States. There's a direct vote for them. And so a lot at play here in all 50 states. And of course, remember, 4 different time zones across continental United States. And you've got places like Hawaii and Alaska. So a long day ahead of us here. 6 a.m. they opened the polls here on the East Coast. This will be staggered across the country. So we have a long day ahead of us here, Flo.
And let's talk about what the key issues in this election are. I was looking at, some of the commentary just from ordinary Americans on social media. And one of the things that I picked up quite a bit of is the talk on freedom. And that was surprising to me because, one would think that America is, one of the most free countries. And as I say, democracy always in action in America. Why is this such an issue?
Well, the freedom issue is very much a Republican talking point, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 lockdowns, the ability of Americans to decide for themselves whether they wanted to take vaccines, for example. There were mandates imposed in certain states. But of course, given the cornucopia nature of the American system, different rules in different states, and that also speaks to different electoral laws in different states. The top issue this election cycle is the economic question. As James Carville, an advisor to then candidate Bill Clinton in the 1992 election against George H.W. Bush, he famously said, it's about the economy, stupid. And as you well know, Flo, around the world, inflation is a big issue. The cost of living has gone up, no less here in the United States, no less in a place like Manhattan, which is a democratic central in many ways here. So the economic question is a big question for Republicans, certainly. The issue of spiraling crime around the country, issues of immigration, particularly as it pertains to the southern border in the United States. But then Democrats will talk about the fact that democracy itself is on the ballot. In the aftermath of what we saw on January 6th last year, the attack on the United States Capitol, based purely on the fabrications that this was a stolen election. But we did put together some sound bites from voters in the United States. Let's listen to what they said. Watch.
Bodily autonomy, is something that we have to have for everybody, and people who think that won't have a trickle-down effect if those rights are stripped away for other people, they don't imagine that it could come down their way. And I think that's very, very foolish and very short-sighted. So we need to protect bodily autonomy for everybody.
Inflation has impacted like so much, obviously with gas, just obviously being able to travel as much as I would want to, but also how that affects what's in stock at stores and how those prices are. So it's not just the gas itself, it really impacts that. And I think with trying to start my own business, it's challenging too for other people to invest in me when they have their own, struggles with dealing with inflation as well.
For me, abortion is more important than inflation at this point. Taking away the rights of half the population to do what they've been able to do for the last 50 years, I think is a mistake.
Abortion it's an issue, but it's going to come up. The economy affects everybody. Abortion affects not everybody. So I think economy is going to weigh more heavily on voters' minds.
I was just at the store, and I paid tons of money for what I normally would pay. I didn't pay a ton, but it was more than I normally would pay. And me and my friend who's staying with me, we were talking about that this morning. Oh, it's gotten more, inflation's really getting bad.
I have to, honest to God, I have to say that ever since the Biden administration has been foolish with the money in the House, and I have never seen somebody pour billions of dollars into another country and not its own, that is clearly hurting. I understand wars going on and this and that, but we got to think about our people first before we send billions and billions across the pond.
So that final voter, they're talking about, of course, the billions that the Biden administration, the United States government has sent to Ukraine as they respond to Russia's invasion. So depending on the issue that is most important to you, Flo, if it's going to be abortion rights, if it's going to be the economy, if it's going to be inflation, if it's going to be gun policy or immigration reform, that is going to drive people to the polls here. And that's why we're seeing so many toss-up races across the breadth of the United States. Very close races in terms of the polling. And that, of course, informs how long we can go into the night here in terms of those ballots being counted and polling results coming out.
And Tina, let's go deeper into those toss-ups. A number of key Senate races are toss-ups, which means that they will be very close. So, which means control, of the Senate could go down to the wire, Sherwin.
Yeah, the all-important control of the Senate, Flo. And of course, there are 35 Senate races in play here, but a lot of those are in sort of leaning Republican states or leaning Democratic states. So like, for example, in the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader currently, is really not going to have much of a problem, much of a hurdle to overcome in terms of re-election here. But if you go to a place like Arizona, where there's a tight Senate race between the Republican and Democratic candidate, places like Nevada, New Hampshire, a close race in Ohio, some are talking about even North Carolina being in play. Those are going to be the key Senate races to watch tonight in terms of which party will control the United States Senate come maybe tomorrow when results become more clear.
All right, I can't let you go without talking about Elon Musk. It seems that, he's used his platform there on Twitter to call for independent-minded voters to vote Republican. Let's talk about what he has said. And I've kind of gotten the impression, I don't know if it's wrong or right, that Americans aren't particularly fond of Elon Musk, actually.
It depends on which American you're talking to, Flo. Some Americans love him, particularly Republicans. I mean, he came out yesterday saying the following in a tweet to independent-minded voters: shared power curbs the worst excesses of both parties. Therefore, I recommend voting for a Republican Congress, given that the presidency is Democrat. So, that kind of statement won't go down very well with Democratic-leaning voters in the United States, and certainly will be celebrated by independent voters, maybe leaning Republican or Republicans themselves. But certainly using that platform, of course, he's now the owner of a privatized Twitter. He's got over 100 million followers. So what he says really does matter in that context. He certainly has a lot of influence. And so, a very partisan statement when you sort of look to people in positions of power, social media and Twitter in particular being a public space in many ways. And so people will certainly be criticizing or celebrating his call for independent-minded voters to vote Republican in this election.
All right, Sherwin, as always, many thanks to you. Sherwin Bryce-Pease there for us at a polling station in Midtown Manhattan, of course, on the back of polls that have opened on the east coast of the U.S. as voters across the country decide which party will control the United States Congress in January.